Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Green. I'm your host for the May 2021 Housing Market Update. Thanks for joining me. Let's jump right in. A lot of great information to bring to you this month, a lot of important information. So here's a look at our panel, which we're going to get to in just a little bit. But let's get right into it. So new construction. One of the big so the overarching problem that we've had in the housing market now for well over a year really has been inventory. And one of the leading factors of that is noted right here in this slide. This is a really excellent slide. It just shows you the number of single family housing units completed in terms of decades of time, right? So you can see how few homes have been built in the United States of America from 2010 to 2019. I think a lot of things lead to that. I think a lot of planning boards locally have slowed the process down by design because communities are trying to grow responsibly. But needless to say, as we are in this situation where people are pouring out of the urban metropolitan areas and into the suburbs, the situation is exacerbated. And this is why we see this feverish pitch that we have with demand for housing, but not enough supply. So let's keep going. Rates are rising. They continue to rise. And that's another factor that could potentially stem some of the demand. We'll see as time goes on. But absolutely, the main driver has been the decline in new construction for single family homes. There's no doubt about that. In terms of just overall inventory, new and existing inventory, you can see that there's been a big jump here, a 40% jump, but that's a year over year look. And when you think about where we were a year ago, we were in pause nationally. A lot of realtors legally weren't even able to show properties, at least here in New York, that occurred. So of course, when you compare year over year, there's going to be a big jump in inventory. So don't get too excited if you're a buyer that there's a lot more inventory coming, because that's not really the case. You really have to take a look at this line, and the situation is not necessarily getting any better just yet in terms of inventory. Again, here's another look. You can just see how dramatic the lack of inventory has been, and the point that we're at. You can really see that back in 2019, it was okay. And it got worse and worse and worse than the pandemic hit. And we are where we are now. So a lot of people are starting to think about a crash. Is the housing market going to crash? What's going on? There was a big spike in activity on Google in terms of that search. When is the housing market going to crash? But the reality is, it is a lack of supply. And this is a quote from Lawrence Yun. He's the chief economist of the National Association of Realtors. And I would agree with him. This is a supply and demand issue. This is not a situation where the creative financing occurred and it's causing people to want to buy more properties. This is a real, true lack of supply. And it doesn't really look like it's getting any better. There is a massive problem with lumber right now. And I don't have any slides on that in particular, but as a very small example, I went to buy one single sheet of plywood and had to pay $100 for it the other day, right here in New York. So lumber's a problem. It's a real problem. If you go down into your local lumber store and you talk with the builders and the people that actually are in it day to day, it's a crisis. It's crisis level. So our supply chain for lumber, somehow leadership in this country's got to get that turned around.
Jeff, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, let's touch on it when we get to the panel, Mike.
Okay.
Let's definitely touch on that. So the housing inventory, when is it going to grow again? This is a survey of economists. A lot of people are starting to think that inventory will grow in the second half of 21. But basically within a year's time is when people think the inventory will grow again. And I do think, sounds like Mike Giannetto, who's on our panel, has some things to add about the lumber. But I think that as that supply chain opens back up again and eases, I think it'll be easier to build homes and to renovate homes that need to be renovated. So that's a factor. So clearly it is the time to sell. I mean, it's a remarkable seller's market right now. And if you're still on the fence about selling, you just should not be. It's an unbelievable time. Look at the amount of average profit that sellers have gotten just in a 1 year comparison, 21 versus 20. $15,000 higher on average, a 26% increase. So, anybody would be happy with that increase in their portfolio. And then, another thing to consider, again, is whether you're a buyer or seller, the American dream is still very much alive. A point to make for those of us who were around back in the financial crisis days, 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, there was a lot of discussion about the American dream being gone. Do people even still want to buy homes, so on and so forth. So you can see that, consumer sentiment still continues to show that people want to be in a home and they view it as a good opportunity. So that's a good thing. Forbearance. Where are foreclosures? A lot of people I talk to on the streets are always saying, well, when are the foreclosures going to come? Well, again, because this is a true supply and demand issue, we're not seeing defaults. You can see that, the number of mortgages active has been unchanged for 3 weeks. It's overall on a decline. It's not, increasing. And with the lack of inventory, it's just not a concern, right? Because those units that may become available through, foreclosure, those will be gobbled right up. So there's plenty of bandwidth within the marketplace to be able to absorb whatever comes at it. And it's just really at low levels. You take a look at, this is a pie graph that we've been looking at now for about a year. And it really hasn't changed all that much. There's roughly, 15% or so that are in trouble, essentially. And that's been the case for about a year. So that seems just to kind of be a natural flow to it. So again, we're not seeing a major mortgage crisis on the horizon at all. So we're really in a supply and demand issue here. So this is also something that's interesting, right? Is we know where we are, but what's also coming. And there just doesn't seem to be any stopping of people's interest to buy a home. This is the largest share back to 1978. So there are just a ton of people looking to buy a home and get into the market and lock in. And that's a good thing. Nothing wrong with that. Let's take a look at the stats across the country. I like to show these graphs every month because it shows you perspective and you can really understand where things are. It's one thing to talk about it, but just to see the raw numbers. So as you can see, the existing, to me, this is the most important stat of all. How many units are selling? How many are moving? And you can see it's up over last year already here in 21. So it's a very strong number. And each one of these years, going back to 2017 was a strong year, so the fact that 21 is higher than all of them coming out of the gates here in the first 3 months is it's a big deal. The home price is just, off into the stratosphere. I mean, look at this variance. It's amazing. It continues. So I don't really see any time in the near future that prices are going to come down. There's just really nothing that is in the foreseeable future that's going to really change that in a sharp curve, so to speak. And then supply of inventory, we talked about this in many different slides, but here is the actual numbers, when you compare it to previous years. I mean, it is low. It's crisis mode. There's just not enough inventory. All right, so some housekeeping items. Our next housing market update, we do it the second Tuesday of every month, I think it is, right? That's where we are now. June 15th happens to be that Tuesday, and we always do it at noon. So please join us. You can stay up to date at hmupdate.com. And a thank you to our sponsor, NewOp, the Business Opportunity Exchange. You can sign up at newop.com. All right, so let's go to our panel. Let me get out of my screen share here. And let's go straight to our panel. So, Mike, let's jump right in. You had you made a comment when I was talking about lumber. What do you have?
Lumber's a huge problem, as we know. I mean, I haven't heard $100 for a sheet of plywood. That's
True
incredible.
story. 5/8
Incredible.
PT, but it was one sheet of plywood.
Yeah, still, that's insane. And the biggest problem is the mills, right? They're not getting it out
Right.
as fast based on them having to shut down or not running third shifts or whatever it is. They're not procuring the wood fast enough. There is no shortage on wood whatsoever. So it purely starts at the mills forward. And it's just incredible what they're doing. And somebody should step in. It's up 140%, from where it was, or more based on that price of plywood,
It's 170%.
Say again?
170.
170. So I have a builder that's a good buddy of mine, and we were talking about him building a house, and he said a house usually costs him somewhere in the area of $17,000 to $18,000 in lumber for the house. And he just got a delivery, and that same order was $40,000. So I mean that's
yeah, it's out of control.
Yeah,
it's literally out of control. Nancy Sardo, an agent at Green Team New York Realty, who does a lot of new construction listings and whatnot, is saying that her builders are pricing things weekly because prices are just changing. So every week the prices may change a bit. For people.
Yeah, I think most builders are putting it in there now that it's contingent upon the price of lumber, so they're allowing it to have a sliding scale.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a lot of, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot, right? But where I live in Warwick, New York, there's a lot of new construction going on. Where some people live, there's thousands of homes being built. That's not the case in Warwick, but there's quite a few. And it's funny. I every day I drop my kids off for school and I see this big home being built in the distance, and there's all the sheathing going on the roof and everything. And I'm like, $100, $100, and I'm just thinking, like, I don't know how they can even do it. It's just so expensive for lumber. It's crazy. So it's a problem.
Which takes it back to the entry level housing that you had that slide up about, right? They can't build entry level housing.
Right.
It's almost impossible. They can't get the land for the correct price. The infrastructure costs are too much, and then building costs are too much.
Yeah. So, to me, in my mind, what's going on is very simple. I think it's very simple. People are exiting the urban areas, trying to come into the suburbs. They're doing it because they're able to work remotely and still make money at a level in which they were previously, but they had to live in the cities. And I think what's going to happen is my prediction is that ain't going to last forever. That's not going to last forever. I think it's going to be a combination of two things. Number one, employers are going to call people back to the office at some point. Like another micro example. I actually took on some more office space recently because I need, our staff, our HQ staff that supports all of our agents and whatnot. We needed more space for them as we've expanded, and they're tired of working at home, and they need an office, and they're ready to come back, and we need that collaboration on a day-to-day basis. So I think the reality is a lot of employers are going to call people back at some point. The other thing is employers aren't stupid, right? They need to drive their bottom line. So what's inevitably going to happen is they're going to realize, okay, well, they have this, ability to work from home. A lot of people would probably really like that. They don't have the living costs that they did. So salaries in some of these positions, my prediction is they're going to come down as more people will be competing for them. I think it's going to find its level, right, at some point. And I think a lot of people are going to get called back to the office, and maybe working remotely versus in the office, they'll be priced differently, and then they'll decide to work in the office because they'll get paid more money. Because the reality is, right, if you look at the number of residential units that the cities have, there's no way that the suburbs can support it. Just can't do it because of the density that's there.
Of course.
That's what's happening. And these people have been able to, they have a lot more money from the urban areas than they normally do out in the suburbs. So they're able to pay a lot for it. So it's driving everything up, So at some point it's going to change. I mean, again, even a micro example, there's a lot of people right here in Warwick. We're a bedroom community of the New York metro area. And there's already a lot of talk, like right now, as the new school years, the existing one is ending and the new one is coming up. Well, are they going to live back in New York? Are they going to stay up here and just keep this as a weekend home? It's a discussion on a lot of people's plate right now. So it's going to be interesting how the school districts deal with it, because they have to deal with that demand. So Karen and Carol, I didn't want to cut you guys out of this conversation. I want to bring you in. What do you have to say? Karen, I see you unmuted your mic. Go ahead.
I did. I was actually just going to mention that a lot of people are not only moving here, but they're also moving with the in-laws. So they need larger homes. And that's why all that money that's coming in from the city, we're now housing not just the families, the nuclear families, but we're also housing the extended families. So people are purchasing with the in-laws, which is different from what we've seen so far, because everybody had their own home and very few people purchased together. So the larger homes that we have in the suburbs are being purchased for a more than just the nucleus of the family, for the extended family. And the other thing I wanted to mention was actually that I do have a lot of investors that now are more looking into the numbers of the renovations. So banks were releasing houses at a higher level already as far as bank-owned properties, which was strike number one, because we were used to having bank-owned properties at $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Those no longer exist. But now, because the cost of lumber and material in general is not as available as it was, flippers and investors really have to calculate down to the T as far as what they're able to do and what they can afford in order to make a profit.
Otherwise,
so that's another thing we need to consider.
I think there's also a lot of flippers that are out there that can't find the right deal, the numbers on the right deal. And now everybody's paying more for those properties. Margins are reducing from cost and from profit perspective. That's another problem.
Definitely the case. I have a couple of investors who want to get properties that they can flip, and it's impossible because the prices are too high. The profit just won't be there. But also touching on what Karen said, that families are living together more, parents are moving in with the kids and so on. There has definitely been an increase in that. And I've also noticed, because of the tightness of the market and the low inventory, more and more people are waiving the appraisal in order to give them an advantage over another buyer. If they're putting enough down, they're doing that.
Right.
As long as the bank allows it, if they're getting a mortgage, but they are waiving the appraisal.
One quick comment on the investor and the flip thing. I look at that as a positive. I really do. I know, Mike, that, you've flipped some houses, and Karen, you have too. And you're sympathetic to investors, as am I, because I own real estate. Right. But it's a good thing for mom and pop, the actual homeowners, to realize equity in their homes and be able to make money and build wealth out of their home. That's good for everybody. It's good for the country. It's good for the local communities. So it's a cycle, right? Like, investors get caught in cycles, and sometimes you can make the deals happen. Sometimes you can't. And right now we're at this stage where it's hard to carve out a profit because there's so many people that are there chomping at it, trying to get the same inventory that the investors are, that they can't get it for a reasonable number. So, you got to find something else to do with your time right now if you're an investor, because it's just not the right time,
Or you need to get an agent that knows what they're doing so they can do the research for you and bring you properties that are worth your money. Like Carol mentioned, she has investors that she works with, so she has the experience. Sure. I had a conversation with two of my investors yesterday, and we calculated that in the last year, they've bought 11 properties with me. So even though they're not flipping, they're renting them out. This is for their future prosperity. This is their retirement plan. This is how they're building their fortune now in this market, because the rental market is also out of control. If an investor buys a property and holds it, they can certainly get more on their rental than they ever could before. We have units that a year and a half ago you couldn't rent for $1,000, and now they're being rented at $16,000, and people are fighting over them. So you just have to know how to adjust, how to think on your feet as far as being in that industry.
Yeah. Carol, were you going to say something?
No, I totally agree with everything that Karen's saying. I mean, investors are doing well with renting the properties out. Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
And I think, what we're discussing here plays into buyer's decision to buy in a hot market like this, right? Because if you're a buyer sitting there saying, man, I've been saving up all these years. I was not quite ready to buy a few years ago. And here I am stuck in this market of, bidding wars and all these things. So the point is, it's always a good time to buy if you have to buy, right? Because what's your alternative? You have to rent. And you're not building equity with rent. You're not getting the mortgage interest deduction if you're renting. So, I would say this: if you're going to buy and live in your home for a run of 6 to 10 years, you'll probably be fine, and you'll probably outlive any sort of downturn and not lose a lot of money on your purchase. And also, rates are so low right now,
Right.
So that's one last thing I'd like to touch on here. We got about maybe 9 minutes max left. I do want to touch on rates. Can we pivot there now? Is that all right? All right, Mike, let's go there. So, every month we talk a little bit about rates, and last month's housing market update, there was some predictions on what's going to happen with rates. And basically across the board, everyone's saying rates are going up. What do you think?
I think that we're in an extremely volatile market right now. We have a lot of things going on. The trend is upward. Everybody thought it was going to continue, and then we had a little pullback in April, right? Rates went into the 2s again. And I think that the quicker this economic news comes out, the faster and more nimble it is that they make a change on the market adjusts for the changes in rates. I do think that it'll settle out in the mid 3s, for this year. I do think that inflation is a problem right now. They think that it's going to be fast and furious, and that's, it erodes the value of the dollar, and then interest rates go up. So I think that it's something to watch. There are other factors that are coming into play here. Unemployment, you see unemployment at 6.1, but it's not the real unemployment. There's still plenty of people that are on the sidelines. You have this non-wage growth, like you mentioned, right? The wages could decrease. You're not going to have purchasing power that way. I just think there's so many factors. I do think that the rates will stay in the 3s for the remainder of this year, and that's kind of where we'll sit.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, we talk about inflation, right? And I think the general consensus, at least what you'll hear in media outlets, is that inflation is going to set in at some point. It's got to happen with all of the, quantitative easing that's happened throughout the world, not just with our central bank, but others. And to me, I sit there and I say to myself, well, isn't it already like it's happening? Isn't it? Like, look at the price of gas, look at what's happened with lumber, look at what's happening with the price of a home, look at what's happened with rent amounts. Like inflation's here, it's here. So there's usually a direct relationship between inflation and mortgage rates, right? Because bond rates increase, so they become more desirable, and that pushes the mortgage rates up, right?
Correct.
So to me, it's like there's no headwind to rates increasing.
No, so what right now, some other, peripheral things are the other countries globally, it's all connected. The other countries going into economic turmoil, look at India, right? Or some of these other countries, war. These things that are going on cause the U.S. to be a safer investment, right, putting back into bonds and then keeping the bonds, the yields low and keeping rates low.
Right.
So
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, it is so complex when you put in all these factors, but I still come back to one thing I'm looking for, and I'm always listening to try to find if there's any sort of metric out there, anybody keeping track of it. When are people going to get back in the office? And how many companies are going to pull people back? Because there was one of the things I listen to, I try to every day, is the Journal has podcasts for like 10 or 15 minutes long, and there's a tech briefing, a money briefing, and what's news. I recommend all three of those to everybody who's interested in learning about business and whatnot. And they had a good one today about commercial real estate and how basically everyone thought there would be a complete implosion, myself included. And it hasn't happened. And not only that, but the developers and the owners of commercial real estate are actually doing quite well. And there was a good segment on that. And basically a lot of companies are not defaulting on their leases for their office spaces, but they haven't yet called their employees back. So the landlords are still hanging in, doing well, because their tenants are not yet insolvent. They're hanging on to the space. So to me, that's an indicator that people are going to be called back into the office. I think it's going to happen. I think that this is going to be a distant memory at some point. And I think people's dreams of all these new remote jobs popping up, I don't know. Maybe it's just me as a traditionalist in a sense that says, no, it's going to go back to the way it was. But I do think there's going to be the large majority of jobs are going to be back in the office.
I agree.
Just so you know, Google has told their employees September.
September?
Yeah.
And that's a tech company.
Yeah, but also a lot of these companies that are calling people back and giving them a date like that, they're not all coming back at once. And there's something called hoteling solutions that people have to actually reserve the time, and they don't have that set desk anymore. And they're putting people all over in different spots based on, the size of the office and the distancing. And I think that's going to be more popular than everybody coming back to the office.
With flexible schedules, 3 days a week in the office, something like that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I remember we only got 3 minutes left, but I was just thinking about this the other day. So I was in college and I think it was strategic management or something was the course. And my professor, George, great guy who I got to know real well and still kind of stay in touch with him. He was pointing out, he's like, look, the trend is to the shorelines and to the cities. That is in general, the population, where things are headed, to the shore, south, and into the cities. And, certainly people want to be by the ocean and where it's warm, but, it's really been the opposite approach just in the last 12 months. And maybe it's George in my head, right, who has been saying the overall trend, and it's probably not going to stop, is, people are going to the coastlines, they're going south, and they're going to the cities in general. I find it hard to believe that really is just not going to be the case going forward. That was a major trend for decades,
Well, Jeff, the other thing we need to consider is the fact that a lot of people have been in forbearance, and that's coming to an end. So people that have been living in their homes and generally not paying a mortgage because they were removed from their job or possibly just furloughed, what's going to happen now? Are they going to be able to come out of it or not?
No, but listen, I showed you a slide before. The numbers don't support where you're headed with that thought. You know what I'm saying? There's very few people that are in trouble that are in that forbearance plan, very few. And when you relate that to the amount of intensity in the marketplace, even if all of them were to default and become foreclosures, they'd get gobbled up in no time.
Exactly.
So we don't have a foreclosure problem on our hands yet. We don't have.
No, I'm not concerned about that. What I'm saying is we're going to have more inventory as a result of that. And therefore that market, the rental market for the investors, will grow.
As far as residential.
Correct.
Yeah. It's only a matter of time before the cities catch fire again. I mean, it's like New York. Like, I keep my eye on what's going on down there because it's like, I don't have the wherewithal to buy an apartment right now, but I would love to have a nice apartment in New York at some point in my life. It'd be great. It's a wonderful city. I love New York. And I think there's going to be some deals for those that have the wherewithal to do it. That ain't me, but for the people that have the wherewithal, there's going to be some deals down there. And it's only going to last so long because New York's not going away. With all the problems that they're having down there with crime, this, that, the other thing, it'll come back,
I agree.
All right. What else? Anything else by anybody else? Last chance. Nothing? All right. So let's give one last view to our viewers with the contact information for our panel. These are all very formidable individuals. Keren Gonen from Green Team New Jersey Realty. Keren, thanks for being here. There's her cell phone number right there on the page. Carol Buchanan from Green Team New York Realty. There's her cell, and Michael Giannetto from Cross Country Mortgage. Thank you guys for being here with me. And thank you for everybody who has tuned in. We'll see you next month on the 15th.